I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Stephen Greenlaw. Steve is a professor of economics at the University of Mary Washington. He's the author of 2 editions of the OpenStax Economics textbooks, and he's also developed the materials for Lumen Learning's Waymaker Introductory Economics platform, which he'll be talking about today, and he also uses it in his classes. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, John. And thank all of you in the audience who've decided that this was worth an hour of your time on a beautiful day outside. At least it's beautiful where I am. As John said, I'm a professor of economics at the University of Mary Washington, where I've been teaching for over 35 years. When I began teaching, I thought that students learned from reading the textbook and listening to the instructor explain the material through lectures. After all, that's how I did it as a student. Since then, I've learned a great deal more about teaching and learning, and especially about learning science. Learning science is a serious academic discipline. If you're not familiar with it, it is the study of how people learn. Now, learning science has found that students learn more from doing than from reading or listening. An early proponent of this was Herb Simon, who I have to point out, in addition to being a cognitive scientist, he won a Nobel Prize in economics. Simon said, learning comes from what the student does and thinks, and only from what the student does and thinks. Which is kind of interesting, because that kind of puts faculty in their place. For a more modern take on this, we have Jennifer Gonzalez, who said, to learn, students need to do something. Can you imagine learning to play baseball or the sport of choice only by reading or hearing about it? I think not. The way you learn a sport is by practicing, and in a similar way, the best way to learn an academic subject is by practicing it, by doing it. All right. So, what is digital courseware? How many of you are currently using digital courseware in your intro courses? I'm not expecting a show of hands here. How many of you are currently using textbooks? Textbooks have long had out-of-chapter exercises for students to complete, but there are 2 problems with those exercises. Speaking as an author, authors and publishers have traditionally put more effort into the content of the textbooks than into the end of chapter exercises, test banks, and other ancillary materials. After all, they sell the textbooks, or at least they used to, and they gave the ancillary materials away. For learning by doing to work well, the exercises have to be good ones, and that hasn't always been the case. The second problem with textbooks, at least traditional textbooks, is instructors have limited time to grade assignments. I personally don't have any TAs to work with. There's only a limited number of problems or frequency of problems that I can assign while still returning them within a reasonable period of time. And what I found is that's not enough practice for most students to really grasp the material. Fortunately, we know that computers and the internet have become more ubiquitous, and as that's, publishers have put more of their ancillary materials online, and in fact made many of them electronically graded, which is great. This helps with problem number 2, but not necessarily with problem number 1. So, what do you call a textbook when it's no longer a printed book? You could call it a digital text, but I think that's doing it a disservice, because increasingly digital texts include features that are simply impossible to duplicate in a printed form. These things include audio clips, videos, simulations, and more. The new term of art for such texts is digital courseware. So what exactly is digital courseware? Well, Titan Partners have come up with a couple of definitions. In 2014, they said digital courseware is curriculum delivered through purpose-built software to support teaching and learning. So that's a fairly general definition. More recently, in 2016, they said courseware is instructional content that is scoped and sequenced to support delivery of an entire course through software that is built specifically for educational purposes. Okay, courseware includes assessments to inform personalization of instruction. Okay, now digital courseware is being developed by three kinds of organizations. First, we have the traditional commercial publishers. So at least in economics, we have McGraw-Hill Connect, we have Pearson My Econ Lab, and we have Cengage MindTap, just to name the big ones. The second kind of organization that is developing courseware is non-traditional publishers, typically nonprofit organizations, but some for-profits also. This would include OpenStax, Cerigo, Smart Sparrow, and Lumen Learning. And the third group of courseware developers are some universities are getting into this. I know that the University of Central Florida has put a lot of time, effort, and money into developing their own in-house courseware. Now, digital courseware is often described as promoting adaptive and personalized learning. Adaptive and personalized. If you start researching or at least exploring this area, you're going to find those words all over the place. They are almost meaningless buzzwords at this point, because anybody who doesn't say adaptive and personalized is sort of meaning they're not in the top rank of courseware. So of course everyone does. What does this really mean? Well, the intent here is to use real-time assessment results combined with artificial intelligence to give students actionable evidence that they can use to enhance their learning. Okay, so it's all about assessing student work and giving them regular feedback so that they can know how to study better, basically. Okay, there are three themes or features in digital courseware. The first one is that, come on now, there we go. The courseware is based on and embodies the findings of learning science. As I said before, learning science is not a buzzword, but it's an academic field often housed in psychology departments. Learning sciences explores how people learn, and by inference, how people could learn better, and also how instructors could teach better. Learning science is used to design the learning environment in the courseware, at least when it's done well. By learning environment, I mean the path that students take through the content, the types and sequencing of learning activities and assessments that students do. Okay, good examples of courseware that emphasize this approach would include Newton, one of the oldest courseware producers, and Cerigo. All right, number two, each student travels a somewhat unique path through the content based on their assessment scores. The idea here is that students who fail to achieve mastery are not generally allowed to progress until they do achieve mastery. The courseware represents the content material and reassesses the students until they can demonstrate that they've learned what they need to learn. Of course, what this means is that students who learn quickly can complete the courseware more quickly than those who require more time, but that's fine. Every student has their own way of doing this. Now, number three, each student is encouraged to think metacognitively about their learning. The best example of this probably is Lumen Learning's Waymaker, and that's what I'm going to talk mostly about today. Okay. Whoopsie, I apologize. I have a sticky clicker here. What is Waymaker? I have the most experience with, and I've worked with several of them, is Lumen Learning's Waymaker. Just to be clear, as John said, I'm the principal subject matter expert, that's the term they use, the author of the Waymaker Microeconomics and Macroeconomics courseware. All this is to say I largely wrote the content. I did get a lot of help. I had editors and that sort of thing. But if you don't like the content, you can blame me. I've used Waymaker in my courses ever since it came out as a pilot about 4 years ago. I've used it both in my online courses and my face-to-face courses. Not all of my courses, of course. These are the intro courses that I'm talking about. So Waymaker is personalized and digital, but it's far more than just a PDF on a website, okay? It includes video, animation, simulation, things that you don't get in print, but have the potential to more deeply engage students. You know, imagine if students thought that reading the book was fun, all right? They don't necessarily have to read. What they have to do is play it, play the game, basically. Okay, let me show you what I mean. You know, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and an animation is probably worth more than that. I've been involved with writing 3 textbooks, and one of the hardest things for an author to do is to identify those things that are obvious to experts but invisible to novice learners. One of those things is how to read a supply and demand graph. Let me show you an example. Okay, here's a supply and demand graph with some other buildings here. This graph makes perfect sense to an economist, but based on Lumen's experience and my experience, it doesn't always make sense to students. The problem is that the graph is providing multiple layers of information, like a GIS map does, but on a single pair of axes. So what we need to do is sort of those layers off one at a time and walk students through what's going on. This is exactly what I do during office hours when students come into my office and they say, I don't understand a price ceiling, you know? Okay, so let's show how it works. And for this, I have to jump out of our PowerPoint and move into, if I can find it. There we go. Not that one. Yeah, here we go. Okay. Apologies for the screen. All right. Okay, so here is a section in the Microeconomics Waymaker platform. It's a section on price ceilings. It talks a little about supply and demand. It shows a video with somebody who many of you will recognize. And then we get to the real deal right here. Okay, here is something that the students can actually play with. Okay, it says with the price ceiling in effect, the quantity supplied remains at, no, sorry, apologies. I forgot to reset this. It's way more fun when you go from beginning to end. Now, shoot. Let me do this just so you don't see all the answers up front. Okay. All right. What you have is a demand and a supply curve, and you have an initial equilibrium point here. Okay. Students usually don't have any trouble identifying the equilibrium point, right? So then we ask, what do you think will be the effect of greater income or an increase in the town's popularity? And they can take their choices here. Suppose they say the supply curve will shift to the right. Then you check your answer and you say, ooh, greater income or an increase in the town's popularity would both cause an increase in demand, not in supply. John, I'm sure you wouldn't have gotten that one wrong. Okay, so we go on to the next page. The effect of greater income or an increase in the town's popularity is to shift the demand curve to the right, as we just learned. Go to the next slide and see what happens when we add a price ceiling. A price ceiling is a legal maximum price, like rent control, okay, just so you know. Here we go to number 3. The price ceiling of $500 is shown on the graph. What's the new quantity demanded? Well, what you do is you start from the price, and then you move along here until you reach the new demand curve right here. And so what that tells us is the quantity demanded is 19,000 units. That's our choice. We check it, and it says correct. Okay, the new quantity demanded is the quantity at the price where the new demand curve and the price ceiling intersect. So then finally you click the 4th screen, and it gives you kind of a summary of everything that was done. If you think back to the page the screen that I originally showed you before we switched to this demonstration, it looked just about like this. Okay, but the difference is that now students have been walked through the process in order to get this. So students really like this stuff. They find it fun. They find it understandable. Much better than just a printed page. That's overwhelmingly the response that we get. All right. Now, while this is cool, this is just scratching the surface of what Waymaker does. Waymaker is far more than a source of course content, okay? It's designed to help teachers, it's designed to teach students to study more deeply and effectively. I don't know if your students are like mine, but many of my students don't seem to have learned to study really well. They think that study means read, highlight, read again, highlight again, read again, etc. What we know from learning science is that learning comes from actually working with the material. And so reading and highlighting is one of the weakest ways to learn that we know of, actually, and yet it's very, very popular. Okay, Waymaker emphasizes mastery learning and personalized tutoring, both from the software and from the instructor. A little bit later, I'm going to talk about how using Waymaker changes the way that instructors teach and also changes the way that students learn. You're getting hints of that along the way here. Okay, again, Waymaker is designed to give students actionable feedback so that they can make their own decisions about how to best allocate their study time. The key to understanding this is to realize that assessment is integral to the learning process. It's not just or even primarily about grades. And that's a tough sell with your students, at least with my students, okay? Assessment is not merely embodied in the content, and it is at a very granular level, and I'll show you that in a minute, but rather it's designed to make students work with the content and interact with it in more intelligent metacognitive ways. So let's take an actual look at it. All right, let me see if I can find that browser right here. Okay, so let's go to the module view. On my campus, we use Canvas, but Waymaker is available for all the major learning management systems. Okay, so Waymaker is organized in terms of modules. Modules are like chapters in a textbook. Okay, so if you're an economist and you look at these modules, you would discover, gee, they look just like the standard module, the standard chapters in a textbook, and they are. Okay, so when you click on one of these modules, it opens up and you see the study plan. So you click on the study plan, and let me see if I can remember to do something that I usually forget. Let's turn on the student view so you get to see exactly what students see. Each of these modules starts with a kind of a high-level overview called Why It Matters. It's a one-page, quick summary of what the students are going to learn in the module. Then it goes to Show What You Know. Show What You Know is a formative assessment, basically a pre-test before they actually study any of the content. The idea here is we want to figure out what the students already know and what they don't know, so that they can efficiently put however much time they're going to put into the course, do it in an efficient way. So if they already know stuff, then they should probably focus on the stuff that they don't know as well. Okay, so then they go into the content, okay? Each of these rectangles, we call them tiles, is a section of the module. Okay, so if we click on, say, supply, what you get is a bunch of subsections. Okay, and these are animation activities, these learn by doings. Okay, as students progress through the content, they take a series of self-checks. Self-checks are short formative quizzes. They don't count towards the student's grade. In fact, I don't even see them. I wouldn't even know how to look. The purpose of these formative quizzes is entirely to give students feedback about how well they're learning the material. Okay, think about a Socratic tutor. The tutor doesn't ask questions primarily to assess the student's knowledge. Rather, they're asking questions to help students work through the content. And that's exactly what we're doing here with Waymaker. So the student reads a page of text or watches a video or plays a little simulation, and then they're posed a short quiz. These self-checks are 1 or 2 questions. They take virtually no time at all to do. Once they do the self-check, then they get immediate feedback on how well they've done, okay? If they pass the quiz, the gate opens and they move on to the next section. If they don't pass the quiz, Waymaker suggests that they review the content again before they retake the quiz. These self-checks they can take as many times as they want to, so they're great for studying for exams. Okay, so we keep going through these different sections of the course, and then at the very end, there is what we call a module quiz. Basically, it's an end of chapter test. These are longer quizzes. They're 10 or more questions. And the grades are recorded. You can weight them as heavily or lightly as you wish. I give them a very small weight because I'm trying to emphasize the sort of the learning aspects of the courseware, but it doesn't matter. If you give them a few points, they're going to want to do well on it. At least my students have worked out that way. Okay, so again, if they fail to achieve mastery on the quiz, Waymaker tells them, here are the sections that you didn't show that you really understand them. You really ought to go back and study those sections again before redoing the module quiz. Okay, the module quizzes are limited. You can only take them 2 times. The idea there is we want them to take these a little more seriously than they do the self-check quizzes. It's not locked in solid. As the instructor, I can reset the quizzes if I think there's a good reason for doing that. In any case, so when Waymaker is used the way it's designed, it changes the instruction and the way that they learn, okay? Let's talk about this. This is really the most interesting stuff, if you ask me. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. Where are we? Here, and present. Okay, so how does Waymaker change the way instructors teach? What I found is that I use my time differently than I did when I was using a traditional textbook. Before Waymaker, I just sort of assumed that students were doing the work, and mostly I put my time into preparing and delivering good lectures, okay? To be completely honest, I didn't even think about whether the students were doing the work. I just assumed that they would, because otherwise how are they going to learn the material? Okay, so with Waymaker, I spend more time beginning the first week thinking about how students are doing. And this is really easy to do because of the information that Waymaker provides. Okay, so I check to see that they're working on the modules. I check to see if they're taking the module quizzes. I check to see how they're doing on the module quizzes. All this process takes only a few minutes to look at an entire class. Also, when students fall short, I use Waymaker to help me understand why and what to do about it. Okay, so it's a great diagnostic tool as well. So at the beginning of the term, each weekend I look at the module quiz results. I don't care so much about the scores, but I do want to see that students are engaging with the content. By the second weekend, I reach out to those students who haven't yet completed a module quiz. I tell them literally, I noticed that you haven't done any of the module quizzes. You know, the modules and the module quizzes are an integral part of the learning process in this class, right? You understand that. Nearly all the students who respond are apologetic and appreciative that I reached out. Some of them act embarrassed, which I guess is understandable. Sometimes the students have good reasons for not having done the work. I teach a lot of adult students who may have been traveling for their job and they just weren't available. Sometimes the students weren't fully aware of how Waymaker works, so I correct that. I have a little one-on-one session with them. Sometimes they don't have a good reason for why they haven't been doing the work, but almost always, now that I've reached out to them, they get going. For me, though, the best part about Waymaker is it gives automatic feedback on how the students are doing. I don't have to do anything. the information comes to me. I don't have to go to a website. I don't have to do anything. What happens is when a student fails a quiz and the default passing rate, which you can adjust if you want, is 80%. When a student fails a quiz, Waymaker sends a message to the instructor. Okay, let me see if we've got a sample here to show you. All right, daily digest. There are different ways that you can do this. You can get them in real time. You can get a daily digest. You can get a weekly digest. This is the one that works best for me. You know, it just says student is struggling. Toby Lane scored a 74. It's important to offer help now. You know, I happen to know Toby, and he's a bright student, and I don't know what he was doing on this particular exercise, so I'm not really worried about Toby. When they score in the 50s or below, then I'm more concerned about what they're doing. So what do? Well, I can send them a message. Whoopsie, sorry. John, this is to John Smith, not his real name. So I take the message that I got, which was a student in your fall Econ 201 section needs your help. That's the one I just showed you, or one like that. And I forward it to them and say, John, I see you had trouble with this module quiz. You know, you can take it one more time. I recommend you wait until we finish discussion of the material in class. This particular student was working way ahead of where we were. Then if you still have questions, come see me before taking the quiz again. Okay, Waymaker doesn't just reach out to students that are struggling, but it also can be encouraging. It sends out these attaboy messages. Lucas, that was fantastic work on the Choice in a World of Scarcity quiz. Keep up the good work. And then, amazingly, they write me back and say, thank you so much. I'll do my best to keep up. Anyway, so I think that's pretty cool. So what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is in any given week, I know which of my students are having trouble. More importantly, I know which topics the class is struggling with. What that allows me to do is adjust my lecture to focus on those topics that students need help with and not the material that they already know. Class time is really valuable. We don't have a lot of it. So why not spend your class time on the stuff that the students need most? So the bottom line here basically is that Waymaker helps me make better, more efficient use of my time as a teacher. And teaching with Waymaker gives me a better sense, a better feel for the effectiveness of my teaching and the student learning in my classes. And this is all without giving them exams or anything like that. So this happens all through the semester as long as they are working through the modules. Let's see how we're doing for time. I just have a few minutes left, I think. Waymaker can be helpful in diagnosing student problems. I typically give 2 midterm exams and a final. After each of the midterms, I review the students' module quizzes for those who did poorly, or else when students tell me that they did less well than they expected. You know, that could be a B, and that's fine. So I look at the Waymaker quiz results, and I look for 2 things. First, did they do all the module quizzes? And then if they did so, did they pass them? Okay. The other thing is when I'm talking face-to-face with students, I ask them if they work through the content carefully before taking the quiz. Some students skip the content, jump right into the quiz, fail, right? So there's a learning curve here, right? That's an easy fix. You tell them, read the material before you take the quiz. Usually they get it. Okay, how does Waymaker change the way students learn? Okay. The thing is, Waymaker offers a really different structure or a really different approach for learning. The structure emphasizes metacognition. This is not something that our students are generally familiar with, or at least not really familiar with. You know, I tell them, you need to think about your learning as you go, okay? I tell them more precisely, the point is not getting the right answer. Rather, the point is understanding the process for getting the answer right. Okay, I encourage my students to work through the content and the various problems and assessments until they feel they understand the process. This is a very different way to learn for most students. After all, students have been trained for what, 12 years? That getting the right answer is the point of learning? There is a learning curve here, and you need to be willing to put in some time early in the semester to teach students how to use Waymaker. This is not a lot of time. I usually spend one class period the first week where I introduce the class to Waymaker and demonstrate how it works. I explain to them the philosophy behind Waymaker and how it differs from what they're probably used to. At various times in the semester, before and after exams, I remind students of how Waymaker is supposed to work. I also encourage them to spread their study out so that they work through the modules around the same time as we're covering the material in class, rather than just cramming at the end, because we know that doesn't work very well. And I guess a takeaway is, if you don't teach students how to use Waymaker, many won't use it correctly. And as soon as they struggle on exams or something, they'll revert back to the old way of, quote, learning, unquote. All right. John, how am I doing for time?
You're doing fine.
Okay. I guess I've stunned them with everything I had to say. Okay, a couple more things. Waymaker has gone through many iterations. The Waymaker today is not the same as the Waymaker 4 years ago. Okay, this is different from a new edition for a textbook. Lumen really believes in continuous improvement, and I'm really encouraged by that. Let me give you a little example of that. After every semester, Lumen downloads the data from every student who uses Waymaker across the country, okay? Of course, the students have to give permission for this. They take all that data and they throw it into a statistical model, they analyze the results, and the idea is to figure out where in Waymaker are students struggling and what is the struggle. What sorts of improvements need to be made. Maybe that part of the content wasn't very well explained, in which case I go back in and I rewrite things. Maybe the assessments weren't really asking what we thought they were asking. Okay, maybe there's something else going on that we don't know about. So one of the results of this regular analysis that literally happens 2 times a year is that we've added more and more interactive features, like the price ceiling animation that I showed you. Lumen has never any sign that they're done, that they think it's good enough. They seriously want to just keep making it better so that more students learn economics. And it's not limited to economics. Waymaker is available for a number of general education disciplines. So I think let me stop at this point.
I think we've lost Steve, so I'm going to leave the room open for just a little bit to see if he can get back in.
In the meanwhile, post any questions you have for him in the chat. I'm sure he'll be back. I think he just clicked on the wrong button.
Yeah, I'm sure he did.
Thanks,
Okay,
John.
Steve, I've gone ahead and made you a co-host again, so we should be all
Thank
set.
you.
Steve, I don't know if you see in the chat that there's a question from Dave Wolf.
I don't see that, but Can you read it to me?
Sure. It says, I have a question. Steve mentions that if we do not teach students to use Waymaker correctly, they do not do well. This is a common problem with most instructional technology, including LMSs. What does Waymaker do to help students learn to maximize the effectiveness of Waymaker? Is there a special set of tutorials or training?
Great question. The first semester we rolled this out and I tried it in my class. I ran into a number of problems, primarily because it didn't occur to me to explain how students should be using this stuff. So the very next semester, we added a module called basically How to Use Waymaker. So it was an introduction, and students worked through it, and it modeled Waymaker, and in the process explained how to use it for best results. And then when I taught the next time, and ever since then, I've made sure that they had to read that module before they could go on to any of the others. So they had to actually do the work to learn the basics of how to make Waymaker work best for them. And as I said, it's also helpful for you to tell them that because they listen to faculty in ways that they don't always pay attention to in the book. Okay, Kelly? Do you create the course content yourself, or does the course come already constructed? The short answer is the course comes already constructed. The long answer is it is very easy to modify the content that's there. You can add content that isn't included in the basic course. You can subtract content. You can easily rearrange the sequencing of different modules, if you want to teach it a little bit differently. So if you just want to try it out of the box, all the content is there. And that module is available. Yes, I believe it is. I haven't looked at them all, but that's the plan. So the how to use Waymaker module is part of every Waymaker course. Yeah. Yes. The best way to think about this, at least for me, is that this replaces a textbook. So I originally thought that I would use this in my online course because I thought it would provide a structure that maybe the book didn't, because it was a space, literally. But then once I saw how well it worked in my online course, and Waymaker is not my course, it's just one part of the course. The rest of the course wraps around it. There are a variety of other assignments, and there's content that I provide them. But anyway, once I saw how well it worked online, then I wanted to adopt it in lieu of the textbook that I'd previously been doing in my face-to-face course. It has changed what I do in the classroom a tiny bit, but not that much. I still talk about, I still sort of lecture, I present the content, but I do it in a more intelligent way so that I don't waste time on stuff they already know.
Steve, I'm not sure if you saw the question from Jennifer Adams.
Is that module available to any Waymaker course?
Yes. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Okay,
I
do see that you answered it. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I saw it after the fact, and so I just kind of answered it on the fly, or at least I attempted to.
Any other questions for Steve today? John, would you like to say anything?
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Steve. We really appreciate this, and I'm looking forward to using your package this fall.
Fantastic. Thank you, John.
Thanks very much, Steve. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you
Perfect.
for the next one.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.